everyone, and welcome to Free Thinkers Rising. My name is Charlotte Tweed, founder of Liberty Travel Coach and relocation strategist. And today I have with me Christoph Heuermann, founder of denationalize.me, perpetual traveler, and Christoph has been to every country in the world. So welcome, Christoph, and please introduce yourself a little further.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. For the last 12 years, I'm also like a relocation expert, mostly focusing on the German-speaking market with my blog Staatenlos. We also have the English blog you already mentioned, Denationalize Me, and we cover basically every country in the world and attract people from every country in the world. So definitely English speakers as well. I left Germany 12 years ago, just before starting my business as a student. I was never employed, I never paid any taxes, and continued doing that until today. My personal passion is always traveling, so I had the goal to travel to every country in the world. Already completed that 3 years ago, then every territory in the world, completed that last year, and I'm still traveling now for hobbies like diving, for example. Just spent a week in the Galapagos Islands for diving, and yeah, many other things. So I'm very well versed in everything related to international optimization, getting more free, more wealthy by applying the right strategies to your life.
So you created a freedom index rating 235 territories and regions in the world. And I've played around with this index. I think it's very, very fascinating. How is this different from traditional rankings, say by like the Fraser Institute?
Yeah, I always wondered when this rankings was published if they really measure freedom, because countries on top were countries like Sweden or Singapore. Singapore is okay, but Sweden or any other like high tax welfare states, and I wondered what they actually measure. And they often measure like government efficiency, but not freedom. Yeah, they measure how safe and sound the democracy is and how fast you can form a company. But if there's high taxes, high social contributions, many other restrictions on entrepreneurship, that's not at all into these indexes. Yeah. So they didn't really make sense for me, especially since many good countries, which are very attractive for entrepreneurs nowadays, ranked also very badly in those indexes. Yeah. And I think I read a tweet of the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, who complained about his indexes, why he is a relatively free country. In my index, he is on number 2. In all these other indexes, because it's not like a full democracy, you can say etc. He was very bad behind, yeah. And that was kind of inspiration for me. I didn't want to place El Salvador on top. I just wanted to make a neutral ranking according to indicators which make sense, and then let's see what comes out of it. Yeah, and this comes much more to what I personally subjectively would say is true as well, but it's all like objective, quantifiable hard data I put into the index in the end. Yeah.
So what is your definition of freedom?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to make a philosophical definition of freedom into index. So for the index, we just use the typical libertarian definition of absence of force and violence. So basically, the index ranks not only taxes and social security, etc., but other things. And for example, the monetary system, how open and free that is. Personal liberties, obviously, as well. Like homeschooling or gun ownership or things like that, and a couple of other things. We also take into consideration important thing the size of the country, yeah, because on a little island, freedom is much different from a big, vast country. And generally, you have more freedom in like Canada or the US nowadays. You're quite restricted in many regards of life. But if you live in Wyoming or in Alberta in the forest, you still probably have much more liberties than people in the big cities or on small islands, right? So we also took that into consideration and a couple of other things. But the most important thing is everyone values different factors of freedom subjectively. And our idea was to just build a tool, and we did that everyone can like prioritize what's important. Maybe taxes are very important and personal liberty is not, then you can just shift it and other results appear.
It's a very easy tool to use. I've played around with it myself, so I really like that you've made it that people can tailor it to their own needs and wishes for the freedom lifestyle that they're looking for. And with mine, when I was doing it, it came out very, very close to what your definition was when you had, when you download the spreadsheet. Próspera is number one in Honduras, El Salvador number two. So I really, really like that people can tailor it to their own needs instead of saying, yes, this is where you should go for freedom. And what I also like too, how you'd mentioned it's different in different states. So you don't just rank the United States all as one country. Texas and Florida are very different from California. You had mentioned Alberta in Canada, very different from the other provinces. So I appreciate that you put that in there.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, that's often completely overlooked. There's many centralized countries. There's not much of a difference, but there's also many decentralized countries, especially the US or even more Switzerland. And for example, Switzerland, you have the central German-speaking cantons, which have very low taxes, very favorable regulations, and then you have like the French-speaking hub of Geneva with all the UN and so on, which is very over-regulated and highly taxed, and that's a big difference. But even in the US, comparing Florida or Texas to California, is like 15% of income tax and lots of other regulations. And another thing we looked at was the thing like by building a home, how restricted it is to build a home, how secure the property rights are, and there's also big differences within a country. And I mean, we could make it a bit bigger. We restricted that to certain countries. For example, we also distributed Spain into different areas, since there's also a big difference if you live in Madrid or Barcelona, for example, because the provincial autonomous provinces have a lot of special rights as well.
And you'd mentioned the UN. So the UN has 193 official states. How are those now irrelevant?
Well, we covered all these 193 official states in the ranking, plus, what is it? 42 more, which is some decentralized states distributed, but also many of the overseas territories, because countries like Cayman Islands or British Virgin Islands or Bermuda are completely autonomous, also in questions of law and taxes. It's not always the case. There's more overseas territories. For example, France, UK has 17 overseas territories, which are mostly autonomous. France, for example, has 16 overseas territories, but most of them are not autonomous. They pay exactly the same taxes as in France. So obviously we didn't cover them. Yeah.
I think a lot of people overlook the autonomous zones, even, not just talking about the UN, but people in general don't think of it. Even the Azores and Madeira being autonomous zones of Portugal, people just don't
Yeah,
think of it.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't think about it. It's very important. I mean, that's also what I did with traveling. There's this American organization called Traveler Century Club, which is a very old organization for like travel lovers, and they categorize the world into 330 territories. And my goal was to complete every of the 330 territories. And they also make the split. Yeah, Spain is mainland Spain, Balearic Islands like Mallorca, Canary Islands, and the little exclaves in Morocco. Yeah, and they all have also different political taxes and so on and so on. Yeah.
So how can this tool help people hack the matrix?
Yeah, I think most people don't have the perspective, and this tool really easily gives them the perspective that some countries, which are often criticized in the media, are actually far freer and better than they might think, like El Salvador, which gets a lot of bad press, or like actually doing a good thing, putting every criminal behind bars. Of course, there might be some people serving life behind bars, which are not, which is not right, but happens. And but generally, the big thing is that it shows that actually countries can change something, and that you can turn from like one of the most criminal and most homicidal country within years to one of the safest countries in the world. And this is a very, yeah, it's like a very bad mirror for the Western governments, which tax you more and more, but provide less and less good services. Yeah, and that's very important to show to everyone.
It is, it's incredible what President Bukele has done with El Salvador. But never would I have considered going there or visiting there or suggesting people live there, but it has changed radically over the last few years. Yeah, yeah. And back to the parameters and the data sorting on your chart, the top 5 countries that come up are, it's Próspera, the ZA and Honduras, El Salvador number 2, Paraguay was number 3, number 4, the Cayman Islands with the UK, and 5 was Panama. Do you have anything that you'd like to say specifically about those countries that end up in the top 5?
Yeah, I mean, there's all countries, not only with very favorable taxes, where often at least foreign income is completely tax-free. They also have relatively easy immigration, so you can actually move there and profit from that. Yeah, you can live there full time, all the year if you like, but you don't need to. And this makes it very accessible for many people. And often they are not the most expensive countries either, especially countries like Paraguay and El Salvador. Even with a rather low budget, you can have a pretty good life there. And that makes it much more attractive than places like the Cayman Islands, which is ranked on 4, or Monaco, I think, which is ranked on 7, which are also pretty free, but are more for the wealthy elite who can afford the high living costs and the high requirements to actually move there. Yeah. But
Now,
I think it's also important to see what like the winners of other rankings, yeah, the winners of the Fraser and Cato make in our index, yeah, and they don't fare too bad. Countries like Singapore, of course, they fare a bit worse in the personal liberties and also in the size of the country, etc. But they still rank relatively well. But if you look into European welfare states like Sweden or Denmark, which are often top of other rankings, they are here in less than like 150 or something. Germany, my home country, is I think 169 from 235. The worst European country is France, even worse. Yeah. So France is on the level of Afghanistan and Syria and so on. Yeah, which is actually true in my eyes.
I think in
Yeah,
my ranking,
this ranking is not about life quality. Yeah, it's completely
yes,
about freedom. Of course,
yes.
France is nice. If you live there as a perpetual traveler a couple of months, great. Great life quality, at least in the right places nowadays. But the ranking is purely about freedom. Yeah.
Yes. And I think in my ranking, when I played with the chart, I think Canada came up at 152. I'm Canadian, so that's why I'm not living there anymore. But with Canada, do you think, are there any beacons of light in Canada?
Yeah, I'm not too knowledgeable about Canada. I mean, Canada has many problems. There's many of the wrong things of like Western welfare states like Germany, France, Spain as well. But the big nice thing about Canada is it's a very, very huge country, a couple of times the size of the European Union, and you have so much space and so much land that you can easily, if you avoid the cities, that you just in your daily life generally have much higher freedom. Yeah, especially if you go even farther away, where you can only go to by boat or by flight or something, you can pretty do much what you want. Of course, you still have taxes and so on, you cannot avoid that, but depending on what you do or how you structure your life, could be nice. And then Canada is also a bit more decentralized, I think. Not as much as the US, but some provinces have some special rights, as far as I know. And there's also some concepts, I think. You're the expert probably on that. Some charter cities, I heard, or something, or some zones where you have a lot of extra rights, like in the mining industry, but you can also use it for other things, I heard. So probably there's a lot of opportunities. Generally, it's also a law thing, yeah, because all the English-speaking countries have the common law, and the common law is much more flexible and generally much more freedom minded as the typical continental laws like in Germany or Spain.
So let's go talk about Prospera a little bit because it's not a country on its own. It's a special economic zone in Honduras, and it comes out as #1. Now, with it being a special economic zone, it's not necessarily a place that's suitable for everybody, of course. Can you tell us a little bit more about Próspera and your experience with that zone?
Yeah, I'm myself an early investor into Prospera. When they started in 2017-18, I invested not a little sum of money into the idea and visited many times since then. Prospera is basically the idea that you make a special contract with the government, yeah, which guarantees you certain rights and obligations. So you pay a couple of hundreds of thousands dollar of fee, and then you get specific rights. That's the idea of a free city. And if the contract provider like doesn't treat your rights well, then you can actually sue him. Yeah, for example, Prospero says 100% security because it's still Honduras is still much more insecure than El Salvador. Roatan as an island is a bit better off, but still. And many local, like mainland Hondurans, move actually to Prospera because they can live a more secure life. Yeah. And if something happens to you, if you're robbed into that zone, then you can sue the provider um, because they didn't guarantee you what was promised in a contract. This is the main concept. And also that the contract is basically um, yeah, that it cannot be changed unilaterally. Like in every country we live in, democracy, every 4 years we make a pick, and then they can change everything as they please. But on a contract, mutual contract, both sides have to agree to change anything. And this is like the two main concepts to be aware of in free cities. Prospera is not like a utopia; it's a compromise, yeah, because actually those things need to get off the ground. Prospera was pioneering it, and they needed to make several compromises with the country of Honduras to get it through. So they have to introduce a couple of taxes, very low taxes in the end, but of course Honduras government participates in their taxes. And how other couple of other restrictions, a certain quota of Hondurans have to move into the city than foreigners, and so on and so on. But still, it's a pretty solid project. It had a lot of problems in the last 5 years because basically Honduras turned into a communist nightmare. But there were recent elections, and now a more conservative, favorable, business-friendly government replaced them. And now, because Prospero survived over all the time, despite all problems, and now I think it can really boom. And there's a lot of signs it actually will. Yeah.
Is there anything about the Freedom Index that I should have asked you but didn't?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to learn from it, of course. And it's in the end 135 different territories, and you can go very deeply into special territories. You can also, for example, prioritize certain things like 100%. Let's, for example, make it only on taxes, yeah, then all the little like island tax havens win, like also Vanuatu in the Pacific or Seychelles in the Indian Ocean and all the Caribbean countries. If you don't consider that, for example, because they don't have income tax at all. Or you say the size of a country, yeah. You put like Canada is the size of a country is very important for me, then Canada massively goes up. Like less taxes, more priority on the size and the resilience of a country. Because Canada is big, has a lot of resources and so on, yeah. So very subjective. Freedom is subjective in the end. I mean, that's the main point. Freedom is subjective, but in order to give perspective and value to people, you have to objectivize it a little bit. And that was the idea behind it, yeah.
Yes, yeah, very good. Now, do you have one actionable step that people can take today in order to reclaim their control?
Yeah, of course, when you get the right perspective and you're willing to act, yeah, you cannot wait that government brings you freedom. That will never happen. You have to act on your own. And then it's just about yeah, getting the necessary knowledge over people like us to yeah, actually make the decision to not necessarily leave. In many places, you can also stay within your home country. just open a foreign bank account, maybe get a Plan B residency, maybe get even another citizenship, that you're more protected and can leave when your country turns even more totalitarian. But if you're willing to leave now, of course, it's even better. And then you can, there's so many opportunities in the world, and the freedom ranking gives a good indicator on that. And of course, we can help implementing everything. You probably as well, relocating, which immigration programs, how to structure yourself tax-wise in a new country, where to open a bank account, what to invest, etc., etc. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I will put a link to your index in the description. Where else can people find out more about you?
Yeah, generally you can just Google my name. It's pretty unique. There's only one other guy who's not very happy that he's called like me. So you find me everywhere on social media, like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, of course, and many other things. People can just write me on Telegram. Every day I answer questions for free. And then, of course, if it gets more complex or if it gets a lot of questions, there's like consultings I do. I do consulting per voice message on Telegram. I do still personal consultings as well. I have a team of a couple of employees who are also very knowledgeable. So we all do that. We all speak English, so no German speaking skills needed. We can everything do in English as well, and we also take Americans, Canadians, and so on, which especially Americans very complex often because the citizenship taxation. But even then, there are opportunities, of course. Huh?
And your English website is denationalize.me, correct?
Yes. It's basically a translation of the German website, but also adapted
Yes.
more to the needs of international people. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your insights and thank you for this tool. It's fun. I encourage people to go in and determine what their definition of freedom is. And you can change the top, sort the sheet, and see where there's some options that you may want to consider visiting or looking at or relocating to.